The dust hadn't even settled from the hoofbeats when Cassandra May Thornfield realized she'd just stolen the wrong horse. Standing in the moonlit corral behind Murphy's saloon in Copper Ridge, she stared at the magnificent black stallion. Before her, easily worth 3 times what she needed to pay off her family's debt. This wasn't just any horse. This was the kind of animal that belonged to someone important, someone dangerous, someone who would definitely come looking for it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But it was too late now. The sound of approaching voices from the saloon meant she had seconds to decide. Return the horse and face whatever consequences awaited her family's failing ranch, or take her chances with whatever storm this theft would bring. She chose the storm. 3 days earlier, Cassandra had been sitting in the cramped office of Copper Ridge Bank, watching her world crumble with each word that fell from banker Harold Wickham's thin lips. The foreclosure papers lay spread across his mahogany desk like a death sentence written in legal terminology. "Miss Thornfield, I understand your family's difficulties," Wickham said, his voice carrying the particular brand of false sympathy that wealthy men reserve for those about to lose everything. "But sentiment doesn't pay debts. Your father borrowed against the Broken Arrow Ranch 18 months ago, and frankly, we've been more than patient." Cassandra's jaw tightened. Patient, as if giving them an extra month to scrape together $1,200 more money than most people in Copper Ridge saw in 2 years constituted some grand act of charity. "Mr. Wickham, surely there's something we can arrange. The cattle market is picking up, and if you could just give us until the spring drive." Wickham interrupted, shuffling the papers with practiced indifference. "Miss Thornfield, your family has been waiting for the spring drive for 3 years running. Each time something goes wrong, drought, disease, rustlers, the bank cannot continue to operate on hope and weather predictions." She wanted to argue, to fight, to slam her fist on his pristine desk and tell him exactly what she thought of his patience. Instead, she sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, because losing her temper wouldn't save the ranch. Nothing would save the ranch. Not legally, anyway. The Broken Arrow had been in her family for 37 years. Her grandfather, Thomas Thornfield, had claimed the land during the great cattle boom, built the house with his own hands, and raised her father, Samuel, to work the land with the same fierce pride that had carried their family through floods, droughts, and the occasional band of cattle thieves. When consumption had taken her mother 5 years ago, it was the ranch that had sustained them, given them purpose, kept them moving forward. Now Samuel Thornfield lay bedridden in that same house, his lungs ravaged by the same disease that had claimed his wife, leaving Cassandra to face their creditors alone. At 23, she had become the sole caretaker of both her father and the failing ranch, watching helplessly as medical bills mounted and cattle prices dropped. "I need time," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have 2 weeks, Wickham replied, sliding the foreclosure notice across the desk. "Pay the full amount by month's end, or the property transfers to the bank." "I'm sorry, Miss Thornfield, but business is business." The ride back to the ranch felt longer than usual, each mile marker reminding Cassandra of how far she was from any solution to her family's problems. The Broken Arrow sat in a valley between 2 ridges, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through scrub oak and mesquite. It had always felt protected, hidden away from the world's troubles. Today it felt isolated, cut off from any hope of salvation. Her father was asleep when she arrived, his breathing shallow and labored. She sat beside his bed for a long time, listening to the sound that had become the soundtrack of their lives, the wet, rattling cough that meant Samuel Thornfield was slowly drowning in his own lungs. "How'd it go, darling?" he asked when he finally stirred, though his eyes remained closed. "Fine, Papa, just fine." the lie came easily. He had enough to worry about without adding their financial ruin to his concerns. That evening, Cassandra sat on the front porch, watching the sun disappear behind the western ridge. She had made lists, calculated figures, explored every legal option she could think of. The arithmetic was merciless. Even if she sold every head of cattle on the ranch, every piece of equipment, every stick of furniture, she would still fall short by several $100s. She needed money, and she needed it fast. More money than any honest work in Copper Ridge would provide. The idea came to her gradually, the way dangerous ideas often do, not as a sudden revelation, but as a whisper that grows louder each time you tell yourself you'd never actually consider it. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in Copper Ridge had heard about the horse trading that went on in the back rooms of Murphy's saloon. Rich men from the back east would bring their prized animals through town, showing them off like trophies before heading to the big auctions in San Antonio or Houston. She had also heard that some of those horses disappeared between towns. Nothing that could be proven, nothing that brought the law down on anyone in particular, but enough to suggest that a person with the right skills and wrong morals could make quite a bit of money very quickly. Cassandra had grown up around horses. Her father had taught her to ride before she could properly walk, and she had always possessed an almost supernatural ability to calm even the most temperamental animals. She could read their moods, anticipate their movements, and had never met a horse she couldn't handle. But stealing was another matter entirely. She spent 2 days arguing with herself, finding reasons why it wouldn't work, why she couldn't possibly go through with such a plan. Then she found her father collapsed in the kitchen, blood frothing from his lips, and all her moral arguments suddenly seemed like luxuries. She couldn't afford. The doctor's visit cost them their last $15. His prognosis was grimmer than ever. Samuel needed better medicine, more care, and most importantly, he needed to be somewhere warm and dry during the coming winter months. All things that required money they didn't have. That night, Cassandra made her decision. She spent the following day in town, making careful observations. Murphy's saloon sat at the end of Copper Ridge's main street, a 2-story building with a large corral out back where travelers could stable their horses for the night. The setup was perfect for her purposes. The corral was far enough from the main building that sounds wouldn't carry, but close enough to the road that a quick escape would be possible. She watched the patterns, noting when the stable boy made his rounds, when the last customers typically stumbled out of the saloon, when the streets emptied for the night. She identified the routes out of town that would offer the best cover, the places where she could hide a stolen horse until she could transport it to one of the trading posts further south. Most importantly, she studied the horses themselves. Not all of them would be worth the risk. She needed something valuable enough to solve her family's financial problems, but not so distinctive that it would be immediately recognizable throughout the territory. On her 3rd night of surveillance, she saw him arrive. The man rode into town just after sunset, sitting atop a black stallion that seemed to absorb the fading light. Even from a distance, Cassandra could see that this was no ordinary horse. The animal moved with a fluid grace that spoke of exceptional breeding, its coat gleaming like polished obsidian, its bearing proud and alert. The rider dismounted with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being noticed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that brushed his collar and clothes that marked him as someone with money, not the flashy wealth of a city dandy, but the quiet prosperity of a man who had earned his fortune through his own efforts. He handed the stallion's reins to the stable boy with casual authority, the kind of gesture that suggested both the horse and the service were worth more than most people's annual income. Then he disappeared into Murphy's saloon, leaving Cassandra to contemplate what she was about to do. The stallion was perfect. Clearly valuable, obviously well-bred, but without any distinctive markings that would make it immediately identifiable. More importantly, its owner appeared to be traveling alone. which meant there would be no companions to sound an immediate alarm when the theft was discovered. She waited until well past midnight, until the last drunken cowboy had stumbled home, and the saloon had gone dark. The stable boy had retired hours earlier, and the streets lay empty under a crescent moon that provided just enough light to navigate by. Moving carefully through the shadows, Cassandra made her way to the corral. Behind Murphy's, the stallion stood apart from the other horses, its posture alert despite the late hour. As she approached, the animal's ears pricked forward, but it showed no signs of alarm. "Easy, boy," she whispered, extending her hand palm up in the universal gesture of equine friendship. "I'm not going to hurt you." The stallion stepped forward, sniffing her fingers with delicate curiosity. His manner suggested intelligence and good training, exactly what she would need for the difficult ride ahead. Working quickly but quietly, Cassandra slipped a halter over the stallion's head. The animal accepted the restraint without resistance, further proof of his exceptional temperament. She had brought her own saddle, a lighter rig that would be more suitable for fast travel, and the stallion stood perfectly still as she secured it in place. It wasn't until she was leading him toward the gate that she noticed the small brand on his left shoulder, not the crude mark of a working ranch, but an elegant design that looked almost like a coat of arms. This horse didn't just belong to someone wealthy. It belonged to someone important. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For a moment, she hesitated. Taking a horse from a traveling merchant or cattle buyer was one thing. Stealing from someone with the resources and connections that Brand suggested was another matter entirely. But then she thought of her father, lying in that narrow bed, growing weaker each day. She thought of the ranch, the only home she had ever known, slipping away because of numbers on a banker's ledger. She thought of all the choices that had led her to this moment, and realized she had no choice at all. She opened the corral gate and led the stallion into the night. The first few miles passed without incident. The stallion moved eagerly beneath her, clearly accustomed to night riding and happy to stretch his legs after a day confined to the corral. His smooth gait ate up the distance, and Cassandra began to think that perhaps her desperate gamble might actually succeed. She had planned to head south toward the trading posts along the Rio Grande, where questions about a horse's previous ownership were rarely asked if the price was right. From there, she could make her way back to Copper Ridge with enough money to pay off the ranch and secure proper medical care for her father. It was a good plan. It might even have worked, if not for the sound of pursuing hoofbeats that reached her ears just as the sun was beginning to rise over the eastern mountains. She turned in the saddle, scanning the trail behind her, and saw a lone rider approaching at a hard gallop. Even at a distance, she recognized the confident posture, the determined set of his shoulders. The stallion's owner had discovered the theft and was coming after his property. Cassandra leaned forward, urging the stallion into a run. The animal responded immediately, his powerful stride carrying them across the rough terrain with surprising speed. For a few precious minutes, she thought they might outrun their pursuer, but the man behind her was an excellent rider, mounted on what was obviously another quality horse. Gradually, inevitably, the gap between them began to close. When he was close enough that she could hear his horse's labored breathing, Cassandra made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to run, instead of pushing the situation toward its logical, violent conclusion, she pulled the stallion to a halt and turned to face her pursuer. The man who rode up to her was younger than she had expected. Probably more than 30, with green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His dark hair was disheveled from the hard ride, and dust coated his clothes, but his manner remained calm and controlled. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that struck her as absurdly polite under the circumstances. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Cassandra straightened in the saddle, meeting his gaze directly. "I believe you're mistaken, sir. This horse came to me of his own free will." The man's mouth quivered upward in what might have been amusement. "Is that so? And I suppose he also saddled himself and opened the corral gate." "Remarkable animal," she replied evenly, "very independent." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the 20 feet of dusty ground that separated them. Cassandra found herself studying his face, noting the laugh lines around his eyes, the strong jaw, the way he held himself with casual authority that spoke of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. She had expected anger, threats, possibly violence. She had not expected casual conversation. "What's yours?" She countered. "I asked first." "Cassandra Thornfield." "Thornfield." He seemed to consider this. From the Broken Arrow Ranch? Her surprise must have shown on her face, because he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features completely. "Word travels fast in a small territory, Miss Thornfield, especially when it concerns a beautiful woman trying to save her family's ranch." Heat rose in her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or something else, she couldn't say. "If you know about my situation, then you understand why I can't simply return your horse." "I understand desperation," he said quietly. "I've been there myself. But stealing horses is a hanging offense in Texas, Miss Thornfield, even when the thief is as lovely as you are." The words hung in the desert air between them like a challenge. Cassandra felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady when she replied, "Then I suppose you'll have to catch me first." Before he could respond, she wheeled the stallion around and spurred him forward, gambling everything on one final desperate flight. The horse exploded into motion, his powerful hindquarters bunching as he launched them across a shallow ravine that cut through the landscape. Behind her, she heard the man curse, the first crack in his composed demeanor followed by the thunder of pursuit. But the stallion beneath her was magnificent, bred for speed and endurance, and he seemed to sense the urgency of their flight. His hooves found purchase on loose shale, navigating treacherous ground with the shoe-footedness of a mountain goat. The chase lasted another hour, winding through a maze of canyons and mesas that Cassandra knew like her own backyard. She had explored this country as a child, following her father on hunting trips and cattle drives, learning every hidden trail and secret passage. Now that knowledge served her well, guiding them through terrain that would challenge even an experienced rider, but the stallion's owner proved to be more than experienced. He stayed with her through every twist and turn, matching her pace across ground that should have broken lesser horsemen. When she finally pulled up at the edge of a steep drop-off, breathing hard, he was less than 50 yards behind. "Impressive riding, Miss Thornfield," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "But you're trapped now. Nowhere left to run." She turned to face him, and this time she could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the way his shirt clung to his chest. The chase had cost him something too. "What's your name?" she asked again, buying time while she considered her options. "Jackson Reeves," he replied, walking his horse slowly forward. "And before you ask, yes, I'm one of the Reeves from the Triple R Ranch up in Montana Territory." Cassandra's blood turned to ice water. The Triple R was legendary throughout the West, one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, owned by a family with connections that reached all the way to Washington, D.C. She hadn't just stolen a horse from a wealthy man, she'd stolen from cattle royalty. "I see that name means something to you," Jackson observed, still approaching at that careful, non-threatening pace. "Good. Then you understand that the situation has gotten considerably more complicated than a simple case of horse theft." "Meaning?" "Meaning I could have the territorial marshal and half the cavalry from Fort Gibson out here within a week." "Meaning you've picked the wrong family to cross, Miss Thornfield." She lifted her chin defiantly, Then why haven't you already? Why chase me yourself instead of letting the law handle it? Jackson reined in his horse about 10 feet away, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his green eyes. Because I'm curious about what kind of woman risks everything to save a failing ranch. Because I've heard stories about Samuel, Thornfield's daughter, and none of them suggested she was a horse thief. What kind of stories? The kind that say she can gentle a wild Mustang with nothing but patience and sugar cubes. The kind that say she once rode 40 miles through a blizzard to fetch a doctor for a neighbor's sick child. The kind that say she's been holding her family together through sheer force of will since her mother died. Cassandra stared at him, unsettled by how much he knew about her life. You seem remarkably well informed about the affairs of strangers, Mr. Reeves. I make it my business to know what's happening in the territory, especially when it involves people who might be useful to me. Useful? Jackson dismounted, his movements fluid and controlled. Step down, Miss Thornfield. We need to talk, and it's difficult to have a proper conversation when you're poised to bolt at the first sign of trouble. I'm fine where I am, thank you. I'm not going to hurt you. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if the idea was so absurd it didn't warrant consideration. If I wanted you dead or arrested, you'd already be both. Something in his manner convinced her, against her better judgment. Cassandra swung down from the saddle, though she kept the stallion between herself and Jackson as a potential barrier. Smart, he observed approvingly. Always maintain an escape route. I can see why you've managed to keep the Broken Arrow running. As long as you have. You know about the ranch? I know Harold Wickham has been trying to foreclose on your family's property for the better part of 2 years. I know your father is dying of consumption and can't afford the medicine that might ease his suffering. I know you're about $1,200 away from losing everything you've ever cared about. The precision of his knowledge was unnerving. How do you know all of this? Jackson pulled a leather flask from his saddlebag and offered it to her. When she shook her head, he took a drink himself before answering. Because I've been watching the Broken Arrow for months, Miss Thornfield. Waiting for the right moment to make you an offer. What kind of offer? The kind that would solve all your financial problems and give you everything you need to save your father and your ranch. Cassandra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. In exchange for what? Marriage? The word hit her like a physical blow. She took an involuntary step backward, her hand tightening on the stallion's reins. You're insane. Jackson's expression remained perfectly calm. I'm practical. I need a wife, you need money. It's a business arrangement that benefits both parties. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. The Triple R covers nearly 200,000 acres, Miss Thornfield. It employs over 300 men and runs 40,000 head of cattle. That kind of operation requires a woman who understands ranching, someone who can handle the responsibilities that come with being the wife of a major landowner. There are plenty of women who would marry you for your money without forcing them into it. But none of them can do what you can do. Jackson moved closer, his voice taking on an intensity that hadn't been there before. None of them grew up working cattle, understanding the land, knowing how to manage men who spend their lives in the saddle. None of them have proven they can hold a ranch together when everything else falls apart. So you've been stalking me like some kind of predator, waiting for me to become desperate enough to accept your proposal? I've been waiting for you to realize that we can help each other. Your theft of Shadow here, he gestured toward the stallion, simply moved up my timeline. Shadow? His name is Shadow. Finest horse I've ever owned, worth about $3,000 at auction. Cassandra's knees nearly buckled. $3,000. More than twice what she needed to save the ranch. I can see you're doing the mathematics, Jackson continued. $3,000 would pay off your debts, provide proper medical care for your father, and leave you enough to operate the Broken Arrow for years to come. What exactly are you proposing? Marry me. Come to Montana Territory as my wife. In exchange, I'll transfer ownership of the Broken Arrow back to your family, clear and free of all debts. I'll also ensure your father receives the best medical care available, whether he chooses to come north with us or remain in Texas." The offer was too good, too perfectly tailored to her needs. What's the catch? No catch. Just the normal expectations that come with marriage. "And if I refuse?" Jackson's expression hardened slightly. "Then I turn you over to the territorial marshal for horse theft. You hang, your father dies alone, and Wickham takes the ranch anyway." The cold calculation behind his words chilled her, more than any threat could have. This wasn't passion or desperation speaking. It was pure business logic, as if he were negotiating the purchase of breeding stock. "You're giving me no choice at all. I'm giving you the only choice that matters. The question is whether you're smart enough to take it." Cassandra walked to the edge of the cliff, staring out over the vast expanse of Texas landscape that stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere out there lay the Broken Arrow, her father, and everything she had ever known. The life Jackson offered represented safety, security, and survival, but also exile from the only world she understood. "Why me?" she asked without turning around. "With your wealth and position, you could have any woman you wanted. Why go to such lengths to trap someone who clearly doesn't want to marry you?" Because most women see the triple R as a prize to be won. They see the big house, the servants, the social position. They don't see the 18-hour days during calving season, the months spent living in line camps during roundup, the loneliness of running an empire in country where your nearest neighbor is 50 miles away. She turned to face him. "And you think I would see those things differently? I think you understand that ranching isn't a game played by rich men for their amusement. I think you know what it means to sacrifice everything for the land and the animals in your care. I think you're the kind of woman who could be a true partner instead of just another responsibility I have to manage. You don't know anything about me. I know you just risked your life to steal a horse to save your family. I know you've been working like a man for years to keep the Broken Arrow running while caring for a dying father. I know you have the respect of every cowhand who's ever worked for you, which is more than most ranch wives can say." Despite herself, Cassandra found his words touching something deep inside her chest. The loneliness he described wasn't foreign. To her, it had been her constant companion since her mother's death. "How long do I have to decide? We need to be back in Copper Ridge by sunset. If you're going to accept my proposal, we'll need time to make the arrangements before word of the horse theft spreads too far. And if I accept, when would this marriage take place?" "Tonight. Judge Morrison owes me several favors, and he's discreet about performing ceremonies on short notice. Tonight?" The speed of it all made her head spin. "That's impossible. I need time to... Time is what we don't have, Miss Thornfield. Every hour we delay increases the risk that someone will connect you to Shadow's disappearance. Once that happens, my offer becomes worthless. I can't marry a woman who's about to be arrested for felony theft." The brutal practicality of his logic was inescapable. He had orchestrated this entire situation to leave her with exactly one viable option: marriage to a man she had known for less than 4 hours. "What guarantees do I have that you'll honor your end of the agreement?" Jackson reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded document. "Transfer of deed for the Broken Arrow Ranch, signed and witnessed, with instructions to record it immediately. Upon our marriage. The original debt has already been purchased from Wickham's bank and marked as satisfied." Cassandra stared at the paper in his hand. "You've already bought our debt?" 3 days ago. "I told you, Miss Thornfield, I've been planning this for months." The revelation hit her like a slap. "You manipulated all of this. You could have simply paid off the ranch and offered to help us without forcing me into marriage." "I could have. But then you would have felt obligated to me without being bound to me. This way, we both get what we need, and the terms are clear from the beginning. You're talking about marriage like it's a business contract. In our case, that's exactly what it is. I need a wife who can handle the demands of the Triple R. You need someone with the resources to save your family. Neither of us is marrying for love, so we might as well be honest about what we are getting into. His bluntness should have been offensive, but Cassandra found it oddly refreshing. At least he wasn't pretending to be motivated by romantic feelings. He clearly didn't possess. What about personal arrangements? She asked, heat rising in her cheeks. Jackson's expression softened slightly. I won't force myself on you, if that's what you're asking. When and if anything intimate happens between us will be entirely your choice. And if I choose never, then I suppose we'll have a very long, very celibate marriage. His tone was light, but she caught something in his eyes that suggested the prospect wasn't entirely appealing to him. You would accept that? Miss Thornfield, I'm offering to give you everything you need to save your family in exchange for your name and your presence. At the Triple R, what happens in our bedroom is between us to work out over time. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. What she saw was a man who seemed genuinely committed to honoring whatever agreement they reached. If I agree to this insane proposal, what happens to my father? He comes north with us if his health permits. If not, I'll hire the best doctors in Texas to care for him and ensure the Broken Arrow has whatever he needs to be comfortable. And I would have your word on that? You would have it in writing, signed and witnessed, just like the deed transfer. The sun was climbing higher now, and Cassandra knew they would have to start back soon if they were going to reach Copper Ridge. By evening, the weight of the decision pressed down on her like a physical force. I need a moment to think. Jackson nodded and withdrew to a respectful distance. Settling himself on a rock outcropping with his back, turned to give her privacy. The gesture struck her as surprisingly considerate given the circumstances. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine the alternatives. If she refused his offer, she would almost certainly hang for horse theft. Even if she somehow escaped that fate, the ranch would still be lost. Her father would still be dying without proper medical care, and she would have gained nothing from her desperate gamble. If she accepted, she would be bound to a man she barely knew, exiled to a territory hundreds of miles from everything familiar. But her father would be saved, the ranch would remain in her family, and she would have security, even if it came at the cost of her freedom. When she opened her eyes, Jackson was watching her with an expression that might have been sympathy. What's it going to be, Miss Thornfield? She took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change her life forever. I accept your proposal, Mr. Reeves, but I have conditions of my own. Jackson's eyebrows rose slightly at her words, but his expression remained carefully neutral. I'm listening. Cassandra straightened her shoulders, drawing on every ounce of confidence she possessed. If she was going to enter into this bizarre arrangement, she would do it on terms that protected what remained of her dignity and autonomy. First, I want it understood that this marriage is a partnership, not ownership. I won't be treated like property you've acquired along with my compliance. Agreed. What else? I want the right to return to Texas twice a year to visit my father and oversee the Broken Arrow. The ranch may be saved, but it still needs proper management. Jackson considered this for a moment. Once a year, he countered. The Triple R demands too much attention during peak seasons to spare you for extended absences. Twice a year, or the deal is off. My father's health is uncertain, and I won't be trapped in Montana while he's dying hundreds of miles away. Fine, twice a year, but no more than 2 weeks per visit. Anything longer disrupts ranch operations. Third, I want my own money. Not an allowance you control, but actual income that I earn and manage myself. This time Jackson's pause was longer. What kind of income? I know horses, Mr. Reeves. I can train them, breed them, break them to saddle. Want to establish my own horse operation within the Triple R, Something that's mine regardless of what happens between us personally. That's actually not a terrible idea. The Triple R could use someone with your skills overseeing our remuda. What percentage of profits were you thinking? 60%. Jackson laughed outright. You have impressive negotiating instincts, Miss Thornfield, but 40% is the highest I'll go. 55. 45, and I provide all the startup costs, facilities, and breeding stock. Cassandra extended her hand. Deal. They shook on it, and she was surprised by the warmth and strength of his grip. For a moment, their eyes met and held, and she caught a glimpse of something that might have been respect in his gaze. Any other conditions? He asked. Just one. If this arrangement becomes unbearable for either of us, I want the option to dissolve it after 3 years. Clean separation, no recriminations, and I keep whatever I've built with the horse operation. Jackson's expression grew thoughtful. That's a significant request. Marriage is typically considered a permanent arrangement. Not when it's entered under duress. I'm agreeing to your proposal because I have no choice, but I won't be trapped in it forever if we prove incompatible. And what happens to the ranch deed if we separate? The broken arrow remains with my family regardless. That was your original offer. Very well. 3 years with the option to renegotiate if both parties are willing. Relief flooded through her. Having an escape clause, even a distant one, made the prospect of marriage to a stranger slightly more bearable. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Reeves. Jackson, he corrected. Given that we're about to become husband and wife, I think we can dispense with formalities. The word husband sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. In a few hours, this man would have legal rights over every aspect of her life. The fact that he had promised not to exercise those rights was somewhat comforting, but the reality of her situation was still overwhelming. We should head back, Jackson said, checking the position of the sun. We have arrangements to make, and I'd prefer to complete this business before too many people start asking questions about where we've been. The ride back to Copper Ridge passed in relative silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Shadow moved easily beneath Cassandra, his smooth gait a reminder of just how much was at stake. She had started the morning as a desperate horse thief and would end it as the wife of one of the wealthiest men in the territory. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the town, Jackson spoke for the first time in an hour. Your father will need to be told. How do you think he'll react to our sudden engagement? Cassandra had been dreading this conversation. Samuel Thornfield was a proud man who had always insisted on meeting his obligations through honest work. Learning that his daughter had resorted to horse theft to save the ranch would devastate him. Learning that she was marrying a stranger to escape the consequences might kill him outright. He'll hate it, she said honestly. But he'll understand the necessity once I explain the alternative. We'll need a believable story about how we met. Something that doesn't involve you stealing my horse. What do you suggest? We met at Murphy's saloon last night. I was passing through town and struck up a conversation with the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. One thing led to another, and by morning I knew I couldn't leave without making you my wife. That's absurd. No one will believe. We fell in love that quickly. People believe what they want to believe, especially when it involves romance. The important thing is giving them a story that explains our hasty marriage without raising uncomfortable questions. They entered Copper Ridge from the north, taking a route that avoided the main street where they might be seen together too early. Jackson had clearly thought through every detail of their deception. Where are we meeting Judge Morrison? Cassandra asked. His private residence. He owes me enough favors to keep this quiet until we're ready to announce it publicly. And when will that be? Tomorrow morning when we leave for Montana Territory. By the time anyone thinks to question the circumstances, we'll be long gone. The cold efficiency of his planning was both impressive and unsettling. Jackson Reeves was a man who left nothing to chance, which probably explained how he had built an empire in some of the harshest country on the continent. They separated at the edge of town, agreeing to meet at Judge Morrison's house at 8 o'clock that evening. Cassandra watched Jackson ride toward the hotel where he had presumably spent the previous night, then turned shadow toward home. The familiar sight of the Broken Arrow buildings brought tears to her eyes. In a few hours, she would be leaving this place, possibly forever. Every landmark, the weathered barn where she had learned to milk cows, the corral where her father had taught her to ride, the kitchen garden her mother had planted represented a piece of her identity that she was about to sacrifice. Her father was awake when she entered the house, propped up in bed with a cup of coffee cooling on the nightstand beside him. "You're back early," he observed, his voice hoarse from the constant coughing. "I thought you were planning to spend the day in town. Papa, we need to talk." Something in her tone must have alerted him, because his eyes sharpened despite the fever that had been his constant companion for weeks. "What's happened?" Cassandra sat on the edge of his bed and took his weathered hand in both of hers. "I've found a way to save the ranch." "What kind of way?" She had rehearsed this conversation during the ride home, but now that the moment had arrived, the words stuck in her throat. "How do you tell your father that you're about to marry a stranger to prevent yourself from hanging for horse theft?" "I'm getting married, Papa." Samuel Thornfield stared at her for a long moment, then started to laugh, a sound that quickly dissolved into a fit of coughing that left him gasping for breath. "Married?" He wheezed when he could speak again. "To who? You haven't courted anyone." "Since Billy Morrison left for California 3 years ago. His name is Jackson Reeves. He owns the Triple R Ranch up in Montana Territory." "Montana Territory?" "Cassie, what aren't you telling me?" She had forgotten how impossible it was to deceive her father. Samuel Thornfield had spent 63 years reading people and situations, and his illness hadn't dulled his instincts. "He's offered to pay off our debts in exchange for marriage. It's a business arrangement." "What kind of business arrangement requires my daughter to marry a man she doesn't love?" "The kind that keeps you alive and saves our home." The words came out harsher than she intended, but she was tired of pretending that their situation wasn't desperate. Samuel's expression grew grave. "How bad are things, Cassie? And don't lie to me this time." She told him everything: the meeting with Wickham, the foreclosure papers, the impossible arithmetic of their debts. She did not tell him about stealing Shadow or the circumstances of her meeting with Jackson. Some truths were too dangerous to share, even with family. When she finished, her father lay back against his pillows with his eyes closed. For a moment, she thought he had fallen asleep, but then he spoke without opening his eyes. "This man, Jackson Reeves. What kind of man is he? Wealthy, powerful, practical?" She paused, searching for the right words. "Not cruel, I think. But not sentimental either. Will he treat you well?" "He's promised not to force himself on me. Beyond that, I suppose we'll have to see." Samuel opened his eyes and studied her face. "You don't have to do this, daughter. There are other ways." "There are no other ways, Papa. This is the only choice that saves both you and the ranch. I'd rather die than see you trapped in a loveless marriage for my sake. And I'd rather live in a loveless marriage than watch you die from lack of proper medical care." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, who says it has to be loveless forever? People have built good marriages on less promising foundations. When is this wedding supposed to take place?" "Tonight." "Tonight?" Samuel struggled to sit up. "Cassie, that's impossible. I can barely stand, let alone attend a wedding. Judge Morrison is coming here. You won't have to go anywhere." "Here? In this house?" "Jackson thought it would be easier for you." Her father's expression softened slightly. "That was considerate of him. He seems to understand the importance of family." They spent the rest of the afternoon making preparations. Cassandra packed a single trunk with her most essential belongings, trying to choose items that would remind her of home during the long exile ahead. Her mother's jewelry, a few books, the quilt that had covered her bed since childhood tangible, connections to the life she was leaving behind. Samuel insisted on getting dressed for the ceremony, though the effort left him exhausted and pale. Cassandra helped him into his best suit, the one he had worn to her mother's funeral, and combed his gray hair until it lay flat against his skull. "You look handsome, Papa. And you look beautiful, daughter. Even under these circumstances, you deserve to look beautiful on your wedding day." She had forgotten about her own appearance until that moment. Her riding dress was dusty from the morning's adventures, and her hair had come loose from its pins during the chase across the desert. Hardly appropriate attire for a wedding, even one born of desperation. "I should change." "Wear your mother's blue dress," Samuel suggested. "The one she wore to the harvest dance the year we met. It should fit you now." Cassandra had never worn her mother's clothes before. They had seemed too sacred to disturb, but tonight felt like an occasion that warranted breaking old rules. The dress was beautiful, made of deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes and fit her as if it had been tailored specifically for her body. Looking at herself in the mirror, she could see her mother's face reflected back at her. The same high cheekbones, the same stubborn chin, the same eyes that could sparkle with laughter or flash with anger depending on the circumstances. "She would be proud of you," Samuel said from the doorway, "making this sacrifice to save your family. She would think I was being foolish, marrying a man I barely know. Maybe. But she would also understand that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes survival matters more." Judge Morrison arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, accompanied by Jackson and two men Cassandra didn't recognize. Jackson had changed into formal evening wear that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean waist, and she felt an unexpected flutter of attraction when he removed his hat and smiled at her. "Miss Thornfield, you look lovely. Thank you." The judge was a small, nervous man who seemed eager to complete the ceremony and leave. The two strangers were introduced as witnesses employees of Jackson's, who would sign the necessary documents and then disappear back into anonymity. "Before we begin," Jackson said, producing several folded papers from his coat, "I believe we have some business to conclude." He handed the first document to Samuel. "The deed transfer for the Broken Arrow Ranch, signed and witnessed, transferring ownership back to the Thornfield family, free and clear of all encumbrances." Samuel's hands shook as he examined the paper. "Is this legal?" "Completely legal. Your daughter will sign it as part of the marriage contract, but ownership reverts to you immediately." The second document was a bank draft made out to the best medical practice in San Antonio. "For your father's ongoing care," Jackson explained to Cassandra. "The doctors there specialize in consumption cases." The third paper was a contract outlining their personal agreement, the horse operation, the visiting rights, the 3-year escape clause. Everything they had negotiated earlier, rendered in precise legal language. "Is this acceptable?" Jackson asked. Cassandra read through the contract carefully, noting that every detail had been captured exactly as they had discussed. "It's acceptable, then. Let's proceed with the ceremony." Judge Morrison opened his book and began the traditional words, but Cassandra barely heard them. She was thinking about the strange turns that had brought her to this moment, the desperate theft that had seemed like her only option, the encounter with a man who turned out to offer everything she needed, the bargain that would save her family, at the cost of her freedom. When the judge asked if she took Jackson Reeves to be her lawfully wedded husband, she heard herself say, "I do," with a steadiness that surprised her. When Jackson was asked the same question, his response was firm and clear. "I do. You may kiss the bride." Jackson stepped closer, his hand settling gently on her shoulders. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something in his gaze that hadn't been there before, a warmth that suggested this moment meant more to him than just the conclusion of a business transaction. His lips touched hers softly, briefly, a gesture more tender than passionate. But even that simple contact sent heat racing through her veins, reminding her that whatever else this marriage might be, she was now bound to a man who was undeniably attractive. When they separated, Jackson smiled, the first completely genuine expression she had seen from him. "Hello, Mrs. Reeves." The name sounded strange on her ears, but not unpleasant. "Hello, husband." The morning came too soon, and not soon enough. Cassandra had spent her wedding night in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the magnitude of what she had done. Somewhere across town, Jackson was presumably sleeping peacefully in his hotel room, confident that his carefully orchestrated plan had succeeded perfectly. She rose before dawn and made coffee, a ritual that had anchored her mornings for years. But today the familiar routine felt hollow, like performing a play for an audience that had already left the theater. In a few hours, she would walk away from the kitchen where her mother had taught her to cook, the parlor where her father had read to her by lamplight, the bedroom where she had dreamed of a future that bore no resemblance to the reality she now faced. Her father found her standing on the front porch, watching the sun rise over the eastern ridge. "Second thoughts?" he asked, settling into the rocking chair beside her despite the morning chill. "Several hundred of them." "It's not too late to change your mind, Cassie. A marriage that hasn't been consummated can be annulled." Heat crept up her neck at his delicate phrasing. "Papa, we can't afford." "I said it's not too late. I didn't say there wouldn't be consequences." She turned to study his face, noting the stubborn set of his jaw that she had inherited. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that your happiness matters more than this ranch, more than my life, if it comes to that." "Don't say such things." "I'm old, Cassie, and I'm dying." "But you're young, and you have a chance at a real life if you don't throw it away on a business arrangement disguised as marriage. Jackson isn't a bad man, Papa. Calculating, yes. Cold, perhaps, but not cruel. That's not the same as being a good husband. Maybe good husbands are a luxury I can't afford." Samuel reached over and took her hand. "Your mother would have boxed my ears if she'd heard me say what I'm about to say. But here it is. A woman has needs, daughter. Not just financial security, but companionship, affection, passion. Don't settle for a man who can't give you those things. And what if those things aren't available to me? What if the choice is between a practical marriage and no marriage at all? Then you choose no marriage and build a life on your own terms. With what money? What prospects? You're brilliant with horses, Cassie. People would pay good money for your training skills, and you know it. You could make a living anywhere in the territory if you were willing to start small and work your way up." The idea was tempting, more tempting than she wanted to admit, but it was also impossibly naive. "Papa, women don't just strike out on their own and become horse trainers. Society doesn't work that way. Society is changing. Maybe it's time someone like you helped push it along." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Jackson appeared around the bend in the trail, leading a pack train of 6 animals loaded with supplies. Behind him rode 2 men she recognized from the wedding ceremony. "Your husband appears to be a man who believes in traveling in style, Samuel." Observed. Jackson dismounted near the porch steps and removed his hat in a gesture of respect toward her father. "Mr. Thornfield, I trust you slept well as a man can when his daughter has just married a stranger." "Papa," Cassandra warned, but Jackson held up a hand. "Your concern is understandable, sir. If I had a daughter, I'd want answers too." "Then perhaps you can provide some. Starting with why a man of your position finds it necessary to conduct such urgent business with a young woman who was completely unknown to him a week ago." Jackson's expression remained neutral, but Cassandra caught a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "The Triple R requires a woman who understands ranching. Mr. Thornfield, Your daughter's reputation for managing difficult horses and men preceded her throughout the territory. That doesn't explain the haste. Cattle season waits for no man's convenience. The longer I delay my return to Montana Territory, the more complicated things become for the 300 people who depend on the Triple R for their livelihoods. It was a smooth answer that skirted the truth without actually lying exactly what Cassandra had come to expect from Jackson's carefully controlled responses. "Will you take good care of her?" Samuel asked bluntly. "I will. That's not a promise I'll take lightly, Mr. Reeves." "Nor should you, sir." The two men studied each other for a long moment, and Cassandra sensed some kind of understanding pass between them. Her father might not approve of the circumstances, but he appeared to believe Jackson's pledge. "I suppose we should load your things," Jackson said to Cassandra. "We have a long ride ahead of us." She had already moved her trunk to the porch, along with her saddle and the few personal items she couldn't bear to leave behind. Jackson's men loaded everything onto the pack animals with quiet efficiency, treating her possessions with more care than she had expected. The hardest part was saying goodbye to her father. Samuel had insisted on standing for their farewell, though the effort clearly cost him. His embrace was fiercer than it had been in months, and she could feel the tremor in his arms that had nothing to do with his illness. "Write to me," he whispered, against her hair. "Let me know you're safe." "I will, and you take care of yourself. Use that money Jackson provided to get proper medical attention. I'll see the doctors in San Antonio next week. And Cassie." "Yes?" "If this doesn't work out, if he turns out to be the kind of man who doesn't honor his promises, you come home. Do you understand me? Whatever else happens, you always have a place here." She nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. If she tried to speak, Jackson helped her mount Shadow, a gesture that didn't escape her notice. Her new husband was apparently willing to trust her with the horse she had stolen, which suggested either remarkable confidence or calculated psychology. The ride away from the Broken Arrow was agony. Every mile that passed between her and home felt like a small death, a piece of her identity being stripped away and left behind. She found herself memorizing details, the particular shade of red in the sandstone cliffs, the way the morning light caught the leaves of the cottonwoods along the creek, the familiar weight of Texas dust in the air. They stopped for lunch beside a stream about 20 miles north of Copper Ridge. Jackson's men, who had introduced themselves as Pete and Miguel, busied themselves with the horses while Jackson and Cassandra sat in the shade of a large oak tree. "Regrets?" he asked, offering her a piece of bread from their supplies. "Several." "You?" "Not yet." "That's hardly reassuring." "I'm not in the business of providing false comfort, Cassandra. This arrangement will be exactly what we make of it, nothing more, nothing less." She studied his profile as he gazed out over the landscape. In daylight, without the urgency of their first encounter, she could see that Jackson Reeves was actually quite handsome in a rough-hewn way. His features were strong without being harsh, and there was an intelligence in his green eyes that suggested depths she hadn't yet explored. "Tell me about the Triple R," she said. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. If I'm going to spend the next 3 years there, I should probably understand what I'm getting into." Jackson seemed to consider how much detail to provide. "The ranch covers most of a valley in the Judith Basin, about 50 miles northeast of Helena. Good water, excellent grass, protected from the worst winter storms by the surrounding mountains." "How many cattle?" 40,000 head, give or take a few thousand depending on the season. We run mostly Herefords, though I've been experimenting with some Angus crosses. "And horses?" "About 800 head in the remuda, plus maybe 50 saddle horses for the working crew. The breeding program needs work. That's where you'll come in." "What kind of work?" "Most of our stock is functional, but unremarkable. Good cow ponies, reliable mounts, nothing special. I'd like to develop something with more style, more speed." Horses that could compete in the eastern markets if necessary. The prospect was intriguing despite her circumstances. Working with quality, breeding stock, developing new bloodlines, creating something beautiful and valuable from careful selection and training. It was exactly the kind of challenge that had always appealed to her. What's your current stallion situation? 3 decent sires, but nothing exceptional. I was hoping you might have suggestions for upgrading the program. I'd need to see what you're working with before making recommendations. But generally speaking, you want to start with one exceptional stallion rather than several mediocre ones, like Shadow? She glanced at the black stallion, who was cropping grass nearby with casual elegance. Shadow would make an excellent foundation sire. His conformation is nearly perfect, and his temperament suggests intelligence and trainability. He's yours. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Shadow, he's yours. Consider him a wedding gift. Jackson, I can't accept. You're not accepting anything. You're taking ownership of the foundation stallion for your horse operation. It's a business decision. But the way he said it, the slight smile that played around the corners of his mouth, suggested it was something more personal than mere business calculation. Why? She asked. Because you stole him fair and square. Seemed wrong to take him back after you'd gone to so much trouble to acquire him. Despite everything, Cassandra found herself laughing. You have a very strange sense of humor, Jackson. Reeves, so I've been told. They rode hard for the next week, covering ground at a pace that left little energy for conversation, but gave Cassandra plenty of time to think. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled north, the arid plains of Texas giving way to rolling hills covered in tall grass and scattered stands of trees. Jackson proved to be an excellent traveling companion, competent, considerate, and refreshingly free of the small talk that might have made their situation more awkward. He seemed to understand that she needed time to adjust to her new circumstances without pressure to play the role of loving wife. The nights were more challenging. They made camp separately, with Jackson and his men sleeping on one side of their fire and Cassandra on the other. The arrangement was practical and respectful, but it also served as a constant reminder of the strange limbo their relationship occupied, married but not intimate, bound together but fundamentally separate. On the 7th night, they camped beside a creek in what Jackson told her was already Montana territory. The realization that she had left Texas behind hit her with unexpected force, and she found herself fighting back tears as she spread her bedroll on the hard ground. The first time is always the hardest, Jackson said quietly. He was sitting on a fallen log nearby, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. The first time for what? Leaving home. Leaving everything you know behind and starting over in a place where nothing is familiar. You sound like you speak from experience. The Triple R wasn't my first ranch. I started in Kansas, then Colorado, before finally settling in Montana. Territory. Each move taught me something about myself I hadn't known before. What did this move teach you? Jackson looked up from his rifle, meeting her eyes across the small distance that separated them. I learned that some risks are worth taking, even when you can't predict the outcome. And some aren't, most aren't, but the ones that are, those are the moves that change everything. Is that what this is? A risk worth taking? Ask me again in 3 years. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Cassandra fell asleep easily. Something in Jackson's tone, in the way he had spoken about risk and change, had eased a knot of anxiety she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The next morning brought their first glimpse of the Triple R. The ranch spread across a vast valley like a small city, with buildings scattered across several acres of cleared ground. The main house was larger than anything Cassandra had seen outside of San Antonio, a 2-story structure built of local stone with a wide veranda that wrapped around 3 sides. But it was the horses that took her breath away. Hundreds of them dotted the pastures that stretched toward the mountains, their coats gleaming in the morning sunlight. Even at a distance, she could see that these were quality animals, well fed, well cared for, bred for both beauty and function. "Welcome to the Triple R," Jackson said, watching her reaction with obvious satisfaction. She searched for adequate words. "It's magnificent. It's home." As they rode down the hill toward the ranch buildings, Cassandra felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since agreeing to this strange marriage, she began to think that maybe, just maybe, she might actually be able to build something worthwhile. Here, the future stretched before her like the Montana landscape itself, vast, challenging, and full of possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. The moment they rode through the gates of the Triple R, Cassandra understood why Jackson commanded such respect throughout the territory. This wasn't just a ranch, it was a carefully orchestrated empire that hummed with quiet efficiency. Cowboys tipped their hats as Jackson passed, their greetings respectful but familiar. The buildings were well maintained without being ostentatious, practical structures built to withstand the harsh Montana winters. Even the corral showed signs of thoughtful planning, positioned to take advantage of natural windbreaks and water sources, but it was the people who truly impressed her. Unlike many large operations where workers kept their heads down and avoided eye contact with the boss, the Triple R crew seemed genuinely pleased to see Jackson return. These weren't men who feared their employer, they respected him. "Mr. Reeves." A weathered cowboy with graying hair hurried toward them, his face creased with relief. "Thank God you're back. We've got problems with the north pasture fence, and that new stallion you bought in Denver has been raising hell with the Mares." "Easy, Frank," Jackson said, dismounting with fluid grace. "One crisis at a time. First, I'd like you to meet my wife. Cassandra, this is Frank Morrison, my foreman. Frank, Mrs. Cassandra Reeves." Frank's mouth fell open slightly before he recovered his composure and swept off his hat. Mrs. Reeves. Congratulations to you both. We weren't expecting ... It was a rather sudden courtship, Jackson said smoothly. Mrs. Reeves will be taking over management of our horse breeding program. Yes, sir, ma'am. Frank's eyes flicked between them, clearly trying to process this unexpected development. Should I have the hands to prepare the guest room in the main house? The master bedroom will be fine, Jackson replied, and Cassandra felt heat creep up her neck. She had been wondering about the sleeping arrangements, but hadn't expected him to address the question so publicly. Frank nodded and hurried away, probably eager to spread the news that their bachelor boss had returned with a wife. Cassandra could practically see the speculation spreading through the ranch like wildfire. That wasn't embarrassing at all, she muttered. Would you prefer I announce to the entire crew that our marriage is strictly a business arrangement? I imagine that would generate even more interesting conversations. Point taken. Jackson led her toward the main house, which loomed even larger up close. The wraparound porch was furnished with comfortable chairs and a porch swing that suggested evenings spent watching the sunset over the mountains. It was the kind of home she had dreamed of as a girl, solid, welcoming, built to last generations. It's beautiful, she said. My mother designed it. She had strong opinions about how a ranch house should look. Had consumption 5 years ago, same as your mother. The quiet pain in his voice surprised her. She had begun to think of Jackson as someone who kept his emotions locked away, but the mention of his mother revealed a crack in that carefully controlled facade. I'm sorry. She would have liked you. Mother always said the Triple R needed a woman's touch to make it complete. He opened the front door and gestured for her to enter first. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior high ceilings. Polished wooden floors, furniture that managed to be both elegant and practical. But it was clearly a bachelor's domain, lacking the small touches that made a house feel like a home. Mrs. Henderson, Jackson called, we have a guest. A plump woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands emerged from what was presumably the kitchen. She took one look at Cassandra and Jackson together and broke into a delighted smile. "Mr. Jackson, you didn't tell us you were bringing home a wife." The courtship was rather brief. "Mrs. Henderson, meet Cassandra Reeves." "Cassandra, Mrs. Henderson keeps this place running and makes the best apple pie in Montana Territory." Mrs. Henderson beamed and wiped her hands on her apron before extending one to Cassandra. "Such a pleasure, dear. And what a beauty you are. Mr. Jackson certainly has excellent taste." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. The house is lovely." "Oh, it's been needing a woman's presence for years. Mr. Jackson does his best, but men don't notice things like fresh flowers or proper curtains. You'll make all the difference." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Mrs. Henderson chattering about meal schedules and household routines, while Cassandra nodded and smiled and tried not to think about how temporary her presence here would be. Eventually, Jackson rescued her from the domestic details. "Perhaps you'd like to see our room and freshen up before dinner?" "Our room?" she asked when they were out of Mrs. Henderson's hearing range. "The master bedroom." "As I told Frank, married couples typically share sleeping quarters." "Yes, but we're not, that is. Our arrangement doesn't necessarily require. The bedroom has a sitting area with a comfortable sofa," Jackson said calmly. "You're welcome to whatever sleeping arrangements make you most comfortable." Relief flooded through her. She had been dreading this moment since their wedding night, uncertain how to navigate the intimate expectations of marriage when their relationship was anything but intimate. The master bedroom was impressive, a large space with windows overlooking the mountains and furnishings that spoke of quality without ostentation. True to Jackson's word, there was a sitting area near the windows with a sofa that looked comfortable enough for sleeping. "I'll take the sofa," she said. "Absolutely not. You'll take the bed. I've slept in far worse places than on a comfortable sofa." "Jackson, I can't." "You can and you will. This is your home now, Cassandra. You're not a guest here." The firmness in his voice surprised her, as did the unexpected warmth in his eyes. For a moment, she caught a glimpse of the man beneath the careful control, someone who genuinely wanted her to feel welcome despite the unusual circumstances of their marriage. "Thank you. Dinner is at 7. That gives you a couple of hours to settle in and rest from the journey." He left her alone in the room, and Cassandra sank into a chair by the window. The view was spectacular, rolling pastures dotted with cattle and horses, mountains rising in the distance like purple sentinels. It was a beautiful country, the kind of landscape that could make a person forget their troubles if they let it. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Henderson peeked around the door with an armload of fresh linens. "I thought you might like clean sheets, dear. And I've drawn a bath for you in the washroom next door. You must be exhausted from all that traveling." The prospect of a hot bath was irresistible after days on the trail. The washroom was another revelation, a real bathtub with hot running water, something she hadn't seen since visiting San Antonio as a child. Mrs. Henderson had even provided lavender-scented soap and thick towels. Sinking into the hot water, Cassandra allowed herself to truly relax for the first time in weeks. The warmth eased muscles she hadn't realized were tense, and the luxury of unlimited hot water felt decadent after years of quick washes in Cold Creek water. When she finally emerged, she felt almost human again. She had packed her mother's blue dress carefully, and she put it on now, wanting to look her best for her first dinner as mistress of the R. Jackson was waiting in the parlor when she came downstairs, and the expression on his face when he saw her made her breath catch. For just a moment, his careful control slipped, and she saw something that looked almost like hunger in his green eyes. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you." The dining room was set for two, with candles and what appeared to be the ranch's finest china. Mrs. Henderson had outdone herself with the meal roast beef, fresh vegetables, and that promised apple pie for dessert. "Tell me about the breeding program," Cassandra said as they ate. "What bloodlines are you working with currently?" Jackson seemed grateful for the business topic. Mostly local stock crossed with some thoroughbred lines I brought in from Kentucky. The results have been adequate, but not exceptional. What's your goal? Cattle, horses, or something more versatile? I'd like to develop a line that can handle ranch work, but also has the speed and refinement for racing if necessary. The eastern markets are starting to pay premium prices for quality western horses. That's ambitious. You'd need to start with exceptional foundation stock and be very selective about breeding choices. Hence my interest in your expertise. They talked horses throughout the meal, and Cassandra found herself genuinely engaged for the first time since leaving Texas. Jackson clearly knew his business, but he also recognized the limits of his knowledge and seemed genuinely interested. In her opinions, "I'd like to see the current stock tomorrow," she said, "and the facilities you have for training, of course. I should warn you, though the crew might be a bit skeptical at first. They're not accustomed to taking direction from women. I've dealt with skeptical cowboys before, I'm sure you have. But these men have been working the Triple R for years. They have their own ways of doing things. Are you having second thoughts about giving me authority over the horse program?" "Not at all. I'm just suggesting that a diplomatic approach might be more effective than a direct challenge to their methods." The advice was sound, even if it rankled her pride slightly. She had learned to assert herself forcefully at the Broken Arrow because her father's illness had left her no choice. But the Triple R was different, a larger operation with established hierarchies and procedures. "I'll try to be diplomatic," she promised. "I have complete confidence in your abilities." After dinner, they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The evening air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of grass and horses and something indefinably wild that spoke of vast open spaces. "It's beautiful here," Cassandra said. "I hoped you'd think so." "How long have you owned the Triple R?" 8 years. I bought it from a man who'd overextended himself trying to compete with the big cattle companies. Got it for a fraction of what it was worth, and built it into what it is now. With a lot of help. Frank Morrison was already here when I arrived. He taught me more about running cattle than I'd learned in 10 years of trying to figure it out on my own. "What made you choose ranching?" Jackson was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My father was a banker in St. Louis, very successful, very respectable. He had my whole life planned out: college back east, a position in his bank, marriage to a suitable girl from a good family." That doesn't sound terrible. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't me. I used to dream about wide open spaces and mountains and work. That meant something beyond profit margins and interest rates. "So you left." I left. Broke my father's heart, disappointed my mother, scandalized half of St. Louis society. But I've never regretted it. Do you miss them, your family? Sometimes. But this is my life now. The Triple R, the people who work here, the land itself, it's all become more real to me than anything I left behind. Cassandra understood that feeling. The Broken Arrow had been more than just a ranch to her. It had been identity, purpose, connection to something larger than herself. Losing it would have been like losing a piece of her soul. "What about you?" Jackson asked. "Any regrets about leaving Texas?" "Too many to count, but also not as many as I expected. The Triple R grows on people. It's not just the ranch, it's..." She searched for the right words. "It's the possibility of building something new. Something that's mine." "Ours," Jackson corrected gently. The word hung between them, laden with implications neither of them was quite ready to explore. Their marriage might be a business arrangement, but they were bound together now, for better or worse. "I should probably turn in," Cassandra said. "Tomorrow sounds like it's going to be a busy day. Good night, Cassandra. Good night, Jackson." She left him sitting on the porch, a solitary figure silhouetted against the vast Montana sky. Despite everything, the circumstances of their meeting, the practical nature of their marriage, the uncertainty of their future, she found herself hoping that whatever they built together would be worthy of the magnificent country that surrounded. Then the master bedroom felt less overwhelming on her second visit. Mrs. Henderson had turned down the bed and left a pitcher of fresh water on the washstand. Simple comforts, but they spoke of care and attention that had been missing from Cassandra's life for years. She settled onto the sofa with a quilt Mrs. Henderson had provided, but sleep eluded her. Through the windows, she could see lights scattered across the ranch buildings and hear the distant sound of men talking, laughing. It was the sound of a community, a place where people belonged. For the first time since leaving Texas, Cassandra allowed herself to hope that she might belong here too. Dawn at the R came with the sound of activity, men calling to each other, horses snorting in the corrals, the distant lowing of cattle. Cassandra woke to find Jackson already gone from the room, though she could smell coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. She dressed quickly in her most practical riding clothes and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Henderson was bustling around the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be enough breakfast to feed a small army. "Good morning, dear. Mr. Jackson is already out with the men, but he said to tell you he'll meet you at the main corral after breakfast. Coffee? Please." Cassandra accepted the steaming cup gratefully. "Mrs. Henderson, how many people work here?" "Oh, it varies with the season. Right now we've got about 40 hands, plus the kitchen help and house staff. During roundup, we might have 60 or 70 men." The scale was staggering. The Broken Arrow had never employed more than 6 hands at its peak, and most years they had made do with 3 or 4. Managing the personnel alone would be a full-time job. "Has Mr. Jackson ever been married before?" Cassandra asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Henderson's face grew thoughtful. "No, dear. Oh, there have been women who set their caps for him over the years, pretty girls from Helena, and even some from back east who came out visiting. But he never seemed interested in settling down. What changed, do you think?" "Well, I couldn't say for certain, but..." Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I think he finally realized that a man can build the finest ranch in the territory, but without someone to share it with, it's just a pretty place to be lonely." The observation struck closer to home than Cassandra expected. She had felt that same loneliness at the Broken Arrow, the sense that success meant nothing without someone to appreciate it with you. After breakfast, she made her way to the main corral, where she found Jackson in conversation with Frank Morrison and 2 other men she hadn't met. They looked up as she approached, their expressions politely curious. "Gentlemen," Jackson said, "I'd like you to meet my wife, Cassandra. She'll be taking over our horse breeding program. Cassandra, this is Tom Bradley, our head wrangler, and Jim Santos, who handles the breaking and training." Both men touched their hats respectfully, but she could see the skepticism in their eyes. They were wondering what a woman, especially a young, inexperienced-looking woman, could possibly teach them about horses. "Mrs. Reeves," Tom said carefully, "Frank here tells us you've got some ideas about improving our bloodlines." "I'd like to see what you're working with first," Cassandra replied. "Every breeding program has to start with an honest assessment of existing stock." "Well, we've got about 50 head in the breeding herd," Jim said. 3 stallions, 47 mares. Most of them are good, solid animals." "I'm sure they are. Could we take a look at them?" The next 2 hours were a revelation. The RR's horse herd was indeed solid, well-fed, healthy animals with good basic conformation. But Jackson had been right about their lack of distinction. These were workmanlike horses, bred for function rather than excellence. Cassandra moved through the herd with growing excitement, her trained eye cataloging strengths and weaknesses. She could see the potential for improvement, the foundation for something truly exceptional. "Your mares have good bone structure," she told the assembled men. "Strong backs, good feet, sensible heads. But you need to be more selective about which ones you're breeding. How do you mean? Frank asked. This Mare here. She pointed to a bay with a slightly Roman nose. She's a good worker, but look at her head. That profile isn't going to improve your bloodline. And this one, she moved to a chestnut with a beautiful face, but poor rear leg conformation. She's lovely to look at, but her offspring will have structural problems. Tom Bradley's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. So you'd call some of the breeding stock? I'd be very selective about which Mares get bred and to which stallions. You want to breed your best to your best and hope the offspring surpass both parents. What about the stallions? Jim asked. Let me see them. The 3 stallions were pastured separately, and Cassandra examined each one carefully. The first was a solid bay, good conformation, calm temperament, but nothing exceptional. The second was a flashy paint with beautiful markings, but questionable legs. The third made her breath catch. He was a magnificent gray, probably 16 hands high, with the kind of presence that marked truly exceptional horses. His head was aristocratic, his movement fluid and powerful, his entire bearing speaking of quality bloodlines. Where did you get him? She asked Jackson. Denver, 3 months ago. Cost me more than I care to admit. He was worth every penny. This horse could be the foundation of something extraordinary. That's what the seller claimed. But he's been nothing but trouble since he arrived. Won't let anyone handle him properly, fights with the other horses, refuses to settle into any kind of routine. Cassandra studied the gray stallion more carefully. He was standing apart from the other horses, head high, ears pricked forward in an attitude of constant alertness. Not aggressive, she realized, but profoundly unhappy. He's lonely, she said suddenly. Lonely? Frank snorted. He's got 2 other stallions for company. Those aren't his companions, they're his competition. In the wild, a stallion like this would have a band of mares, a purpose, a place in the social structure. Here, he's isolated and bored. So what? Do you suggest? Jackson asked. Let me work with him. One-on-one, no pressure, just getting him used to human partnership instead of human domination. Tom Bradley looked dubious. Ma'am, with respect, that horse has put 2 experienced hands in the hospital. He's not what you'd call gentle. I'm not interested in making him gentle. I want to make him cooperative. There's a difference? Jim asked. All the difference in the world. A gentle horse submits because he's been broken down. A cooperative horse chooses to work with you because he trusts you. Jackson was studying her face with that intense focus she was learning to recognize. How long would you need? Give me 2 weeks with him. If I can't establish a working relationship by then, we'll try a different approach. And if he hurts you, he won't. Horses don't hurt people out of malice. They hurt people who frighten them, or threaten them, or force them into situations they don't understand. The men exchanged glances that clearly said they thought she was crazy, but Jackson nodded slowly. 2 weeks. But I want someone watching at all times, and if I think you're in danger, the experiment ends immediately. Agreed. They spent the rest of the morning touring the other facilities, the training corrals, the feed barns, the tack rooms stocked with equipment that represented more money than the Broken Arrow had seen in years. Everything was well organized and efficiently run, but Cassandra could see opportunities for improvement. Your training corrals are too small, she told Jackson as they walked back toward the main house for lunch. Horses learn better when they have room to move naturally. Those corrals have worked fine for 8 years. I'm sure they have, but you want more than fine now, don't you? Jackson stopped walking and turned to face her. What exactly are you proposing? Build me a round pen 60 feet across with good footing and high enough walls that a horse can't jump out, but low enough that I can work from outside if necessary. Also, I'll need a separate paddock for the gray stallion, somewhere he can see the mares, but not reach them. That's a significant investment for a 2-week experiment. It's not just for the experiment. It's for the future of your breeding program. You can't develop exceptional horses using ordinary methods. They stared at each other across a few feet of Montana dust, and Cassandra realized this was a test. Jackson was gauging whether she truly understood what she was talking about, or if she was simply making impressive-sounding demands. How much would these improvements cost? He asked finally. The round pen, maybe $300 if you have the crew do the work. The paddock, another $100. Materials and labor. And in return? In return, I'll give you horses that will make the Triple R famous throughout the territory. Horses that Eastern buyers will pay premium prices for. Horses that will make your current stock look like plow animals. That's quite a promise. I don't make promises I can't keep. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes studying her face as if trying to read her thoughts. Then he smiled, not the polite, controlled expression she had grown accustomed to, but something genuine and warm. Frank, he called to his foreman. Get a crew together. We're building Mrs. Reeves' round pen. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Cassandra threw herself into planning the new facilities, while getting to know the existing horses and the men who worked with them. To her surprise, once the cowboys realized she actually knew what she was talking about, most of them proved eager to learn new methods. Tom Bradley, in particular, turned out to be an excellent student. He had good instincts with horses, but had never been taught to think about training as anything more than breaking an animal's will to resist. Watch his ears, Cassandra told him as they worked with a young gelding in one of the existing corrals. See how they're flicking back and forth? He's listening to you, trying to understand what you want. The moment you start fighting with him instead of teaching him, those ears will pin back and he'll stop trying to cooperate. I never thought about it that way, Tom admitted. Always figured you had to show them who was boss right from the start. You do have to establish leadership. But there's a difference between being a leader and being a bully. A good leader makes his followers want to follow. The round pen took shape quickly under Frank Morrison's supervision. The crew clearly took pride in their work, and several of them offered suggestions for improvements that showed they understood what Cassandra was trying to accomplish. Jackson appeared regularly to check on the progress, but he didn't interfere or second-guess her decisions. She found his quiet confidence in her abilities both surprising and oddly touching. On the 4th day, as she was supervising the installation of the gate hardware, he appeared at her elbow with 2 cups of coffee. Taking a break, he suggested. Just making sure they get the gate mechanism right. If it sticks or makes noise, it could spook a horse at a crucial moment. You think of everything, don't you? I think of everything that could go wrong. It's the only way to prevent most of the problems before they happen. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the crew work. The mountains rose around them like purple sentinels, and the morning air carried the scent of grass and horses, and something indefinably wild. Cassandra, Jackson said suddenly, I owe you an apology. For what? For the way this all started. For manipulating the situation to force you into marriage. For taking advantage of your desperation. She turned to study his profile, noting the tension in his jaw that suggested this admission wasn't easy for him. You saved my family, she said finally. Whatever your motives, you kept my father alive and preserved the ranch. I can't regret that. But you can regret being trapped here with me. I'm not trapped. I have options, we both agreed to that. And I'm beginning to think this arrangement might work out better than either of us expected. Jackson turned to meet her eyes, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression that he usually kept hidden. What makes you say that? We work well together. We want similar things. And we're both practical enough to build something meaningful without needing romantic illusions to sustain it. Is that what you want? A marriage without romance? The question caught her off guard. A week ago, She would have said yes without hesitation. Practical partnership seemed infinitely preferable to the emotional risks of love. But now, looking into Jackson's green eyes, she found her certainty wavering. "I don't know," she admitted. "What do you want?" "I want whatever will make you happy here. Whatever will make this feel like home instead of exile." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten with an emotion she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "It already feels less like exile," she said softly. "Good. That single quote says ... good." The next morning, the round pen was ready. Cassandra stood at the center of the 60-foot circle, testing the footing and checking the sight lines. It was perfect and closed enough to contain a horse safely, but open enough that the animal wouldn't feel trapped. "Ready for your first student?" Jackson asked from the gate. She turned to see him leading the gray stallion, who was dancing at the end of a long lead rope, clearly excited by the change in routine. "More ready than I've ever been for anything in my life." Jackson released the stallion into the round pen and stepped back. The magnificent gray immediately began moving around the perimeter, testing the boundaries, taking the measure of this new environment. Cassandra stood perfectly still, in the center, letting the horse examine her and the space without pressure. After several minutes, the stallion slowed to a walk, then stopped and turned to face her. "Hello, beautiful," she said softly. "Ready to learn something new?" The gray stallion moved like liquid silver in the morning light, his powerful muscles rippling beneath a coat that seemed to capture and reflect every ray of sunshine. Cassandra had been working with him for 10 days now, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Where once he had been nervous and aggressive, he now showed the quiet confidence of a horse who understood his place in the world. He responded to her voice commands, moved away from pressure and toward invitation, and demonstrated the kind of partnership that most trainers spent years trying to achieve. "I'll be damned," Tom Bradley murmured from his position at the fence. 3 weeks ago, that horse was a menace. Now look at him. Jackson stood beside Tom, his arms folded on the top rail of the round pen, watching his wife work with an expression of undisguised admiration. Over the past 2 weeks, he had witnessed something extraordinary, not just the transformation of a difficult horse, but the emergence of Cassandra's true confidence and skill. "Walk on, Sterling," Cassandra called softly, and the stallion moved into a flowing walk around the perimeter of the pen. She had named him Sterling after his silver coat, and the horse seemed to approve of the dignified moniker. "And halt!" Sterling stopped immediately, turning to face her with ears pricked forward in alert attention. "Come here, beautiful." The stallion walked directly to her, lowering his magnificent head to accept the gentle scratch behind his ears. That had become their ritual greeting. "Show off," Jackson called, and Cassandra turned toward him with a grin that made his heart skip in a way that was becoming dangerously familiar. "Jealous?" "Absolutely. That horse gets more of your attention than I do." The teasing comment slipped out before he could stop it, revealing more of his feelings than he had intended. But instead of the embarrassment he expected, Cassandra's expression grew thoughtful. "That could be remedied," she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, laden with possibilities that both frightened and excited him. Their marriage had begun as a business arrangement, but somewhere in the past 2 weeks, it had started becoming something else entirely. "Mrs. Reeves." Frank Morrison's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Mrs. Reeves, you need to come quick." Cassandra immediately led Sterling to the gate and slipped out of the round pen. "What's wrong, Frank?" "Rider coming hard from the south. Looks like young Billy Patterson from town. He's pushing his horse something fierce." Jackson was already moving toward his own horse. Bad news traveled fast in a ranching country, and a hard-riding messenger usually meant serious trouble. Billy Patterson pulled up in front of the main house in a cloud of dust, his horse lathered and blowing hard. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, and his face was white with exhaustion and whatever news he carried. Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Reeves. I got a telegram for you from Texas. Cassandra's blood turned to ice. Telegrams from Texas could only mean one thing: news about her father. With shaking hands, she took the yellow paper and unfolded it. Samuel Thornfield passed peacefully yesterday. Stop, doctor says nitrogen monoxide. Suffering, stop, funeral arrangements awaiting. Your instructions, stop, deepest sympathies. Stop, Dr. Harrison. The world seemed to tilt sideways. She read the words 3 times, but they refused to make sense. Her father couldn't be dead. She had just left him 2 weeks ago, and he had been weak but stable. Cassandra. Jackson's voice seemed to come from very far away. She looked up to find him watching her with concern, and realized she was swaying on her feet. Papa's gone, she whispered. Jackson was beside her in an instant, his strong arms catching her as her knees buckled. She found herself pressed against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and soap and something uniquely him. I'm sorry, he said softly. I'm so very sorry. The tears came then, hot and fierce and unstoppable. She wept for her father, for the words left unsaid, for the future they would never share. But mostly she wept for the crushing guilt that she hadn't been there when he needed her most. I should have stayed, she sobbed against Jackson's shirt. I should never have left him alone. You couldn't have known. And you gave him the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that you were safe and the ranch was saved. But I wasn't there. You were where he wanted you to be. Living your life, building your future. No father wants his child to watch him die. Jackson held her until the worst of the grief passed, his hand stroking her hair with surprising gentleness. When she finally pulled away, his shirt was damp with her tears, but his expression held nothing but compassion. We need to leave for Texas immediately, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Of course. I'll have the men prepare. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. I need to go alone. This is family business. Jackson's expression grew carefully neutral. Cassandra, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I need to bury my father and settle his affairs. I need time to grieve properly. And I need to figure out what comes next. What do you mean? She met his eyes directly, knowing that what she said next would determine the future of their unusual marriage. I mean, I need to decide whether I'm coming back. The words hit Jackson like a physical blow. He had known this moment might come, had even agreed to it in their original arrangement, but he hadn't expected it to hurt quite so much. I see. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do. Cassandra wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. Despite the warm morning air. When we married, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. Security, stability, a practical arrangement that would benefit us both. But being here, working with the horses, living in your house, sharing meals with you, what? It's become real, Jackson. This marriage, this life, this place, it's become real to me in ways I never expected. And I don't know if that's because I'm genuinely happy here or because I'm grateful to you for saving my family. Jackson studied her face, seeing the confusion and pain that went far deeper than grief for her father. What would convince you? I don't know. Time maybe, distance, a chance to think clearly without feeling obligated to you for everything you've done. And if you decide not to come back, then you'll be free to find a wife who can love you the way you deserve to be loved. The irony of her words wasn't lost on Jackson. He had entered this marriage believing he wanted a practical partnership, someone to help him run the ranch without the complications of romantic love. But somewhere in the past 2 weeks, he had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with his own wife. How long? He asked. I don't know. A month, maybe 2. However long it takes to settle everything and figure out where I belong. And if I asked you to stay, if I told you that losing you would be worse than anything I've ever faced? Cassandra's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. Is that what you're telling me? Jackson looked at this remarkable woman who had turned his orderly world upside down in the space of 2 weeks. He thought about the way she laughed when Sterling did something particularly clever, the concentration on her face when she was working with a difficult horse, the unconscious grace with which she had taken over the running of his household. He thought about waking up every morning knowing she was there, and the prospect of a future without her felt like stepping into darkness. I'm telling you that somewhere between the moment you stole my horse and right now, you managed to steal something much more valuable. What's that? My heart. He smiled, remembering their first encounter in the desert. Fair trade, Darlin. The endearment hung in the air between them, loaded with everything they had been too careful to say. Cassandra felt her own heart skip at the warmth in his voice, the love shining in his green eyes. Jackson, go to Texas, he said quietly. Bury your father, settle your affairs. Take all the time you need to think. But know this, whether you come back or not, you'll always have a place here. Not because of our arrangement, not because of obligations or gratitude, but because this is your home now, because you're my wife, my partner, my love. And if I don't come back, then I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for the 2 weeks when I had everything I ever wanted. 3 months later, Jackson stood in the same spot where he had first seen the R, watching a lone rider approach from the south. His heart hammered against his ribs as the figure drew closer, resolving into the familiar silhouette he had dreamed about every night since she left. Cassandra pulled Shadow to a halt in front of him, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the space that had once seemed like an insurmountable distance. Hello, husband, she said softly. Hello, wife. Welcome home. She dismounted and walked into his arms as if she had never left, and when he kissed her this time, there was nothing careful or hesitant about it. It was the kiss of a man claiming his woman, and a woman claiming her place in the world. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you too, more than I thought possible. Fair trade? Jackson laughed, spinning her around until she was breathless and giddy. Fair trade, Darlin. The fairest trade I ever made. Behind them, Sterling whinnied from his pasture, as if offering his approval of the reunion. And in the distance, the mountains of Montana Territory rose toward a sky that promised endless possibilities for a love that had begun with theft and grown into something more precious than gold. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.